Welcome to Screen Blast Repeat. My name is Kirk Horton, the lead editor, and in this video I'm going to document the first era of avant-garde metal and look at the artists that brought unorthodoxy and experimentation into the wider genre. Before I do this though, it's important to define what we mean by avant-garde. The term originates in French military vocabulary meaning advance guard to describe the actions of a reconnaissance unit who would scout out the terrain ahead to prepare for the advance of the main army. In the arts, it was first used in 1820 by French essayist Benjamin Olinda Rodriguez in The Artist, the Scientist and the Industrialist, which urged artists to serve as the vanguard of the people and inflame them to demand radical social and economic reforms. In music, the avant-garde has often been associated with the progressive and radical artists who challenge societal norms and take pride in being outside the traditional hegemonic discourse of the time. By contrast, heavy metal is famous for its insularity, fantasy themes and counterculture pride, yet, unlike punk, it's not really synonymous with political activism, though of course there are exceptions here. Therefore, avant-garde in this context is easier to define and is mainly about challenging a status quo of established features that define metal as a guitar, bass and drums lineup, rooted in distorted blues rock, rock and roll and in later years punk. To turn this on its head then, the characteristics of avant-garde metal are the use of non-traditional instruments, incorporation of unfamiliar genres into a metal setting, a willingness to dismantle boundaries of what is acceptable and unacceptable in metal music, unorthodox vocal techniques or singing styles, the desire to create metal music from non-metal foundations, and an emphasis on moving away from standard song structures in favour of experimentation. So where did it all start? This is the history of avant-garde metal part 1, the years 1985 to 1992. Before we talk about avant-garde metal in the definitive year of 1992, we must go back to the beginning with the band that first earned the moniker and identified with the avant-garde. We're talking about Swiss metal innovators Celtic Frost, who formed from the ashes of proto-death metal unit Hellhammer in 1984. Emerging onto the heavy music scene with their debut album Morbid Tales, Tom G. Warrior & Co. laid the foundations for black metal, sludge metal, black and doom and death metal, and followed up in 1985 with the H.R. Geiger-inspired To Megatherion. It's here they first earned the description avant-garde metal, thanks to their introduction of the French horn, their use of female soprano contributions, and an unusual dedication to poetry. By 1987, they'd evolved into the most forward-thinking metal band on the planet with their seminal LP, Into the Pandemonium. So why was Into the Pandemonium such a landmark release in 1987? Its sheer ambition and innovation are remarkable. The song Mesmerized is where the gothic metal movement drew its inspiration, but compositions like Tristesses de la Lune and Rex Irae Requiem were unlike anything heard in extreme metal at the time. Indeed, the former featured a splendid violin trio and cello arrangement for a Charles Baudelaire poem sung by a majestic soprano, while the latter featured a Beauty and the Beast call and response affair with chugging guitars and fluttering string orchestrations. Simply put, no metal band had done anything like this, and no music skeptic, metal fan, or even industry observer thought it possible to unite metal with classical music and romantic poetry. The album won praise in the mainstream rock press and set them up as a respected musical artist beyond underground metal, but they threw it all away a year later with the most controversial album in the history of the genre. 1988's Cold Lake saw a complete lineup change, a shift in sound towards cock rock themes and heavy metal cliches, and a disastrous flirtation with breakbeats. It alienated their fan base, who saw it as a shallow piece of music from heavy metal's most intellectual group. In hindsight, it halted the band's momentum and tarnished their reputation, despite 1990's recovery operation Vanity Nemesis, which hoped to reaffirm their credentials with a technical thrash album in the manner of Megadeth. By 1992, Celtic Frost were finished as a force in metal. For 2 years, they'd given vague hints of a new album with a working title of Under Apollyon's Sun, which never materialised. Instead, vocalist and guitarist Tom G. Warrior created the band Apollyon Sun and released their solo LP in the year 2000. Nevertheless, we can hear some of the ideas in their heads at the time, thanks to a 1992 compilation album, Parched with Thirst Am I and Dying. The 1991 demo song, Idols of Chagrin, shows a band adopting a muscular groove metal sound that Sepultura would perfect 2 years later on Chaos AD. The legacy of Celtic Frost's love for all things gothic and poetic would provide the impetus for Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride and Anathema to introduce soprano singers, violins and orchestrations into their music for what we now know as gothic metal. Indeed, 1991's Gothic by Paradise Lost was seen as radical for its time because it took an ugly death metal aesthetic and wrapped it in sorrowful melodies. This was a novel idea at the beginning of the 1990s, even if Celtic Frost sketched the first outlines of it back in 1987. Celtic Frost's commercial backers at Noise Records had a keen eye for other metal bands with abundant ideas and potential beyond headbanging brutality. This would be a challenge to fund and market to a core heavy metal audience, but they saw how French-Canadian progressive thrashers Voivod could evolve into something unique, even if 1986's Roar suffered from a weak guitar tone and an atrocious audio mix. This all came together in 1987 for the remarkable progressive thrash brilliance of Killing Technology, which incorporated robotic vocals, atonal guitars, and hardcore punk into its technical structures. 2 more groundbreaking albums followed in 1988 with Dimension Hatros and their 1989 major label debut Nothing Face, before they disappointed the suits at corporate headquarters and a portion of their own fanbase with 1991's alternative metal experiment Angel Rat. Another band to emerge from Noise Records were Swiss thrashers Coroner, who began life as roadies for Celtic Frost before recording their Death Cult demo in 1986 with Tom G. Warrior on temporary vocals. Their first 2 records ramped up the technical elements of thrash metal with progressive influences, but it was 1991's Mental Vortex that introduced jazz fusion and avant-garde influences into the mix. 1993's Grin went even further but experimented with industrial programming and groove metal riffing before they split up in 1996. Unusually, this type of sound had no global centre. The third group to achieve prominence in this small world of experimental progressive thrash metal, the Japanese trio Doom. Though crippled by poor audio engineering for their 1987 debut, No More Pain, they soon transitioned into a formidable rhythmic unit with 1988's Complicated Mind and 1991's Human Noise. Like Celtic Frost, Voivod and Coroner, they settled on the idea that industrial music would be an inevitable part of metal's future, yet none of them produced anything notable in this arena. Though Voivod and the Contemporaries are synonymous with progressive thrash metal, there's no doubt they had an influence on future avant-garde metal artists like Vedwen Zende, Gorguts and Imperial Triumphant. Finned in millennium genres like mathcore and the dissonant forms of death metal are also indebted to the technical chaos produced by these bands. Celtic Frost and the progressive thrashers at Noise Records illustrated how the harshest of metal could be combined with the most refined aspects of high culture. California's Mr. Bungle demonstrated its prowess at the other end of the spectrum. Starting out in high school as a gory thrash metal band with their 1986 demo The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny, the group made their way into the hands of Anthrax, Slayer and Faith No More in the underground tape trading scene. When the latter needed a new singer to replace Chuck Mosley in 1988, they approached Mr. Bungle's Mike Patton to audition for the band. What followed was one of the most original metal albums of all time. To understand Faith No More's The Real Thing, you need to survey the state of mainstream rock and heavy metal in 1989. Big hair, flamboyant solos, high-pitched vocals, shallow lyrics and rock and roll posturing ensured that no self-respecting music fan could take this art seriously. Contrast this with the funk bass, rap verses, colourful keyboard hooks, soulful piano presets and thrash metal barbarism of guitarist Jim Martin, and you had an album that sounded fresh and exciting. On top of this, Mike Patton's versatile switch between growling, crooning, snarling and rapping gave the pop-friendly singles an edge that others did not possess. In retrospect, the quintet's progressive elements and love of soul should have been far beyond the imagination and acceptability of the record-buying public, but they bought it in their droves, sending it double platinum thanks to the breakout hit single Epic. It wasn't avant-garde metal, but it birthed the genre of alternative metal. The commercial and cultural success of The Real Thing landed Mike Patton a major label deal for his Mr. Bungle crew. They signed up with great alacrity and issued their self-titled debut in 1990, with their A&R team hoping the attention on their frontman would open many doors for them. Alas, it didn't succeed on a commercial level, but the genre-hopping madness of Mr. Bungle's bizarre 1990 LP established them as a cult band in no time. Warner Brothers tried to market it as Mike Patton's seriously weird new project, but that might be an understatement. Mixing thrash metal, ska, circus music, jazz and funk, it allowed Patton to expand his vocal styles even further and would prove to be a big influence on the likes of Korn, Avenged Sevenfold, the Dillinger Escape Plan, Slipknot, System of a Down and even Dream Theater. When Faith No More re-emerged in 1992 with Angel Dust, it was clear that Mike Patton's Mr. Bungle personalities were now a big part of their sound. Entertainment Weekly called it probably the most uncommercial follow-up to a hit record ever, and even Kerrang! Magazine could not make sense of it despite awarding its predecessor their coveted Album of the Year for 1989. Yet Angel Dust would go on to sell 2 million copies worldwide, even if it ended their profile as genuine pop stars in their home country. So why is Angel Dust a seminal record? You only need to listen to the first 60 seconds of opener Land of Sunshine to know this is an eccentric masterpiece. Circus organs, thrashing guitars and popping bass techniques collide with baritone operatic singing and hard-hitting drums. Hysterical laughing replaces lyrics in the chorus, heavy breathing permeates through the mix. Orchestral keyboard hits bring it to a magnificent close. Perhaps the biggest surprise of Angel Dust was its willingness to embrace death metal in its heavier moments. The likes of Malpractice, Smaller and Smaller and Jizzlobber are as gruesome as anything in the obituary canon, yet all of them are Faith No More in their execution. Bass heavy, aggressive, quirky, and furnished with samples of gothic string arrangements and atmospheric keyboards. It's an avant-garde metal album, isn't it? Well, nobody called it that at the time, but it has many of the qualities: the willingness to experiment, the incorporation of unfamiliar genres, the good cop, bad cop vocals, the idea that you can mix Lionel Richie with Slayer as easily as you mix gin and tonic. Angel Dust would become the playbook for every alternative band of the 1990s that liked the muscular guitars of metal but preferred the groove of hip-hop and the versatility of multiple vocal styles. Decades later, it still sounds like it came from another planet, much like their vicious sense of humour. The band from this era that do not sound like an avant-garde metal act today, but baffled many people in 1990, were New York quartet Helmet. So how can a group that saw their riffs and grooves copied by everyone from Limp Bizkit to Silverchair and Deftones be considered avant-garde? Again, we need to look at this from the perspective of 1990. Four university-educated men with short hair and backgrounds in jazz were not the type of people you'd expect to see writing aggressive music with chunky riffs and a testosterone-fueled bounce. Their 1990 debut, Strap It On, soon created an underground buzz and led to a major label bidding war, with Interscope Records coughing up $1.2 million to lock them into a 3-album deal in early 1992. With a bigger marketing budget and $50,000 worth of touring support behind them, Page Hamilton and crew realised there was no need to compromise in any way for their next record. 1992's Meantime is now recognised as a classic of 3 genres: alternative metal, noise rock and post-hardcore. Hard on the drop D riffing and subtle rhythmic complexities, it exploded into the mainstream in the wake of Nirvana's Nevermind and would go on to be certified gold in 1994. Though not considered avant-garde in the 21st century metal landscape, its staccato bludgeoning, noisy guitars, chaotic free jazz soloing, and hardcore screaming created a unique cauldron of loud and abrasive music in 1992 that confused as many people as it bedazzled. Its influence was widespread across the heavy music spectrum. Sepultura and Pantera adopted its syncopated riffing. Napalm Death moved their sound away from grindcore towards the Helmet groove. Even thrash bands like Creator used the New York group's atonal aggression to navigate the tumult of the 1990s. Helmet might have toyed with jazz chords and rhythms, but they coated it in a fireball of amp distortion. By contrast, New York free jazz collective Naked City, formed in 1988 around visionary saxophonist and composer John Zorn, their aim was to see how far they could push improvisation using an orthodox rock lineup. Being exposed to Napalm Death expanded these possibilities. The February 1990 release of Naked City was a John Zorn solo record featuring covers of movie themes with original compositions that would often swerve between surf rock, avant-garde jazz and grindcore. During this time, he'd also recorded 42 hardcore miniatures with Japanese vocalist and visual artist Yamataka Ai and a host of respected avant-garde jazz musicians including Bill Frisell on guitar, Fred Firth on bass and Joey Barron on drums. On the 1st of November 1990, the group released Torture Garden and then combined 29 songs from this LP and 9 from the first record for 1992's Grand Guignol, with 6 additional covers of classical composers and a new 17-minute title track. It's fair to say this music would never be in danger of conquering the mainstream with its demented screaming, chaotic guitars and divergent rhythms all competing against each other in classic jazz style. They followed it in the same year with 2 more albums. Heretic featured as the soundtrack for a pornographic S&M movie called Jeu des Dames Cruelles, while Leng Chi consisted of a single improvised track of 31 minutes steeped in sludgy guitars and droning instrumentation, in contrast to the jazz grind of their first 3 albums. The final record from Naked City in 1993 saw them drop the dissonant metal elements in favour of an ambient noise approach, but they left their mark on extreme music, especially in the world of underground metal. If 1992 marked a turning point in heavy music conquering the mainstream, thanks to the grunge explosion, it did little to bring attention to a former crust-punk band from Oakland, California, who went through a drastic transformation for their third album. Ditching the hardcore punk speed and introducing doom metal and industrial elements while retaining the throat-scraping vocal screams, Neurosis produced a landmark record with Souls at Zero. Taking the intense ritualistic violence of Swans, the marriage of heavy guitars and classical arrangements of Celtic Frost, the slow sludgy sound of Melvins, the darkness of Joy Division, and the dissonance of Killing Joke and Godflesh, the group's third LP needed at least 10 years to be understood and appreciated. How could something with flutes and folk guitar passages coexist with droning amp distortion and churning bass lines? Was it doom metal? Post-hardcore? The term that came to define their music was post-metal, and Souls at Zero is now the definitive album in this category. Put yourself in the perspective of a music reviewer in 1992. It's hard enough to get your head around the art school doom metal of Soundgarden, which was rising through the charts thanks to the aftermath of Nirvana and Pearl Jam's unforeseen breakout success. With Chris Cornell's superhuman voice, ear for melody and epic chorus deliveries competing against feedback-coated guitars and monstrous Black Sabbath riffing, you could be forgiven for thinking that Soundgarden were too extreme to enter the mainstream. Neurosis, on the other hand, were too progressive, too volatile in their dynamics, and too aggressive in their vocal expressions to reach the ears of music critics in 1992. More importantly, they weren't from Seattle, but this would work in their favour by the mid-1990s when the underground and the Puritan music media were ready to listen. So that concludes our survey for the first wave of avant-garde metal. What strikes me is how technical brilliance is not a prerequisite for avant-garde metal in its opening era. Nobody would call Celtic Frost virtuoso musicians, would they? Naked City tried to unlearn their jazz chops. Helmet were more focused on harnessing noise and perfecting the rhythm underneath. Neurosis started out as a crust-punk band. Faith No More was one of the tightest live bands in the world and had the best rhythm section, arguably in rock and metal at the time, in their peak. Yet only Mr. Bungle would be considered virtuosos, even if their interest lay in splicing together incongruous musical genres. By contrast, the progressive thrash of Voivod, Coroner and Doom incorporated technical musicianship from non-metal genres, especially in the way they often ditch the pentatonic rock foundations of metal in favour of dissonance and jazz fusion formations. Their music belongs in the progressive metal world more than the avant-garde domain, yet they can't be ignored in the origins of experimental metal. Are there any glaring omissions from this documentary? Leave a comment if you think I've missed any important artists. I hope this gives you the impetus to discover some new bands watching this video. Before I did my research, I must admit that I knew nothing of the Japanese trio Doom, but I'm pleased that making this documentary allowed me to delve into their catalogue and appreciate their innovative art. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next installment of this series. Take care.